The nursery corridor was sealed at 2200, as it always was, yet at 2217 a soft amber light glowed beneath the door. The night schedule listed no caregivers inside. The royal guard on duty slowed his steps, studying the access panel. No entry had been logged. He rested his hand near the handle, but did not turn it. The silence inside felt deliberate. The corridor outside the nursery wing held a stillness that felt constructed rather than natural, the air faintly cool from regulated circulation and carrying the soft scent of polished oak and laundered linen. The royal guard stood beneath the muted wall sconce and watched the thin line of amber light resting beneath the nursery door, noting how it cut cleanly across the carpet's edge as though drawn with a ruler. And he knew with quiet certainty that the light should not be there, because the nightly schedule had been confirmed at 21:55, the child settled by the assigned caregiver, the interior lamps dimmed to their lowest setting, and the security panel sealed at 2200 under his supervision. He did not immediately move, instead lowering his gaze to the digital access reader mounted beside the frame, its display calm and untroubled, no recent entries scrolling across its memory, no delayed authentication attempts, nothing to explain illumination beyond the door. He touched the earpiece at his collar, but did not press the transmit key, aware that once he reported a potential irregularity, the response would follow protocol. Log the anomaly, dispatch a supervisor, restrict movement, wait for clearance. And waiting, in this wing, meant time measured in quiet minutes while a child slept only meters away. He stepped closer and listened, hearing neither footsteps nor the rustle of fabric, nor the low murmur of a caregiver soothing restless dreams, only the faint hum of concealed ventilation and the distant tick of a corridor clock that marked each second with indifferent precision. He withdrew a slim tablet from the interior pocket of his tunic and reviewed the live camera feed covering the hallway, replaying the segment around 2211 when a minor distortion had flickered across the image, a fraction of static that lasted less than 2 seconds, subtle enough to pass unnoticed in routine review, yet now impossible to ignore, the frame briefly whitening before restoring itself as if the corridor had blinked. He checked the adjacent cameras, stairwell, service lift, exterior approach, and found no corresponding anomaly, which narrowed the irregularity rather than explaining it. Protocol was explicit. Unexplained signal interference required supervisory assessment before entry to a restricted royal chamber, even by assigned security, and deviation demanded written justification. He understood the logic behind the rule, layers designed to prevent impulsive decisions that might escalate minor issues into unnecessary alarms. But standing there, observing the unauthorized glow, he felt the measured weight of responsibility settle more firmly across his shoulders. The child inside was not merely an occupant of the palace, but a minor member of the royal family, entrusted to the institution's protection, and his duty was not abstract. He placed his gloved hand near the handle without touching it, testing the temperature of the metal through proximity alone, half expecting warmth that would indicate recent contact, yet the air remained uniformly cool. He considered the possibility of a caregiver returning quietly for a forgotten item, though procedure required sign-in regardless of familiarity, and no staff member would risk disciplinary action for such a trivial oversight. He finally pressed his earpiece, initiating a low transmission to Central Security, reporting a lighting irregularity and minor camera distortion in measured terms that did not yet imply breach. And as he waited for acknowledgement, his gaze never left the amber line on the carpet, which seemed, in the silence, to widen slightly, as though the room beyond were breathing. Central Security responded with routine composure, advising him to maintain position while a shift supervisor reviewed system logs remotely, and the guard acknowledged the instruction without commentary, though the directive introduced a delay he found difficult to accept.
He watched the seconds accumulate on his wrist chronometer, each passing mark deepening his awareness that if the irregularity signaled intrusion rather than malfunction, hesitation would serve no one. A faint vibration from the tablet indicated incoming diagnostic data, confirming that the 2211 distortion had originated within the nursery corridor feed alone, not from the broader network, suggesting localized interference rather than central failure. He replayed the moment once more, slowing the footage until individual frames appeared as still photographs, and in one frame, barely perceptible, he noticed a slight shift in shadow near the secondary service door at the corridor's end, a darkening that might have been compression artifact or something occupying space for a fraction of time before disappearing. He enlarged the image, sacrificing clarity for scale, and the pixels blurred into abstraction, offering no definitive shape, only suggestion. The supervisor's voice returned through the earpiece, calm but detached, stating that no authorized maintenance or staff movement had been scheduled for the wing, and that environmental sensors showed stable readings, no forced entry alarms, no pressure change. The instruction remained: hold position until an officer arrived to conduct a dual verification entry. The guard felt the corridor's air shift subtly as ventilation adjusted, brushing coolness against his cheek, and he became acutely aware of the nursery's interior silence, too complete, as though insulated. He stepped closer to the door and lowered himself slightly, aligning his eye with the narrow gap beneath, observing only carpet and the diffuse glow of a lamp angled away from the threshold, nothing moving within his limited view. His training emphasized patience, the discipline to trust layered systems rather than individual impulse, yet training also stressed the primacy of protecting vulnerable persons when ambiguity intersected with risk. He weighed the consequences: formal reprimand for procedural deviation, written review, potential reassignment, against the intangible cost of ignoring instinct. His thumb hovered over the manual override key, embedded discreetly within his access card, a feature reserved for immediate child welfare concerns. Over the earpiece, the supervisor informed him that the responding officer was 4 minutes away. 4 minutes inside a sealed corridor felt longer than it sounded. He exhaled once, steady and controlled, then informed Central Security that he was initiating a precautionary welfare check under Section 9 authority, citing camera interference and unexplained illumination as justification. There was a brief pause on the line, not disagreement, but recalculation, and then a restrained acknowledgement that the deviation would be logged. He inserted the card into the reader, entered his code, and felt the soft mechanical release within the doorframe. As he pressed the handle downward, the amber light widened abruptly across the carpet, and the nursery, still and deceptively calm, opened before him.
The door opened without resistance, hinges moving in near silence, and the royal guard stepped into the nursery with measured restraint, allowing his eyes to adjust to the softened amber glow of a single shaded lamp positioned near the far wall. The air inside was warmer than the corridor, carrying the faint sweetness of talcum and clean cotton, layered over something sharper that did not belong. He closed the door behind him, but did not allow it to latch fully, preserving immediate exit access, and paused just inside the threshold to listen. The room answered with the slow, rhythmic breathing of the child asleep in the crib, the gentle, mechanical whisper of a white noise unit placed discreetly on a shelf, and nothing more. He moved first to the crib, boots quiet against the padded rug, and confirmed visually what he already sensed. The child rested undisturbed, blankets tucked securely, a small hand curled near the edge of the mattress, face relaxed in untroubled sleep. He did not touch the child, only scanned for irregularities, flushed skin, signs of discomfort, displacement of bedding. Finding none, he allowed a fraction of tension to release before redirecting his focus to the perimeter of the room. The secondary service door at the rear wall stood slightly ajar,
no more than 2 centimeters, enough to break the clean line of the frame. That door was not accessible from public corridors, but from an internal service passage used primarily by senior household staff and facilities personnel. It was designed to remain secured at all times when the nursery was occupied. He approached it slowly, noting as he did the scent that had unsettled him upon entry, a faint trace of industrial polish, chemical and metallic, inconsistent with the mild botanical cleaner approved for children's quarters. He crouched near the threshold of the service door and examined the latch, observing a minute scratch along the metal plate, recent enough that the underlying steel still held brightness. He pushed the door open slightly farther and peered into the narrow passage beyond, illuminated only by emergency floor lighting that cast low blue strips along the baseboards. The corridor was empty, its air cooler and carrying the same chemical undertone. He rose and spoke quietly into his earpiece, informing Central Security that the nursery's secondary access point was unsecured and that he was conducting an immediate sweep of the adjoining service passage. This time, the pause on the line extended longer, the weight of deviation compounding. The supervisor requested confirmation that the child was safe. He answered simply that the child was asleep and unharmed. Permission for corridor sweep was granted, with the instruction that a second officer was en route and that facilities management would be contacted to account for any maintenance activity. He stepped through the service doorway, leaving the nursery door partially open within his line of sight, unwilling to sever visual proximity completely. The blue emergency lights reflected faintly off his polished buttons as he advanced down the narrow passage, senses tuned to minor disturbances, the echo of his own breathing, the subtle change in airflow near vents, the distant vibration of machinery deeper within the palace infrastructure. Halfway down the passage, he noticed a wall panel slightly misaligned, one corner not flush with the surrounding surface, as though removed and replaced without full attention. He stopped, studying it, and felt the first clear indication that what had occurred was neither accidental nor routine. He did not open the wall panel immediately. Instead, he photographed it with his secured device, capturing the angle of misalignment and the serial number printed discreetly along its base, preserving evidence before disturbance. Then he pressed gently along its edges until it shifted outward, revealing a cluster of sensor wiring and a compact signal relay unit mounted within. One connector sat partially disengaged, not fully removed, but loosened enough to interfere intermittently with camera transmission. The adjustment was subtle, precise, unlikely the result of vibration or careless maintenance. He resecured the connector temporarily without restoring full tension, careful not to erase trace indications, and withdrew, replacing the panel as he had found it. Through his earpiece, Central Security confirmed that no maintenance ticket had been issued for the nursery wing that evening, and that facilities management reported no scheduled sensor testing. Moments later, a facilities supervisor identified as on-site acknowledged contact and stated that he had performed a manual sensor override earlier that night due to routine calibration, though no digital log reflected such activity. The guard requested that the supervisor meet him immediately at the nursery corridor. He returned through the service door into the nursery, ensuring once more that the child remained undisturbed, then stepped back into the main hallway where the responding officer had just arrived. The second guard's expression remained professionally neutral, but his presence altered the atmosphere, formalizing the situation beyond solitary discretion. Within minutes, the facilities supervisor approached from the lift, attire impeccable, demeanor composed, yet edged with impatience. He explained that older sensor arrays occasionally required hands-on recalibration, and that he had chosen to address a minor fluctuation personally to avoid triggering unnecessary alerts. When asked why no written authorization or digital entry existed, he responded that verbal instruction had come from a senior household aide who preferred discretion regarding technical adjustments near royal quarters. The explanation was delivered evenly, without overt defensiveness, yet it failed to account for the unsecured service door or the partially disengaged relay. He listened without interruption, observing details rather than tone, the slight sheen of perspiration at the supervisor's temple despite the corridor's cool temperature, the faint chemical scent matching the one inside the nursery, lingering on his cuffs. He requested the exact time of the alleged calibration. The supervisor stated it occurred shortly before 10:15. The guard knew the camera distortion had registered at 10:11. The discrepancy was small, but measurable. He informed the supervisor that a formal incident report would be filed and that all related access logs, including manual overrides, would be subject to review. The supervisor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly and cautioned that escalating routine facilities work could reflect poorly on internal coordination. The guard met his gaze steadily and replied only that the protection of a minor royal occupant superseded reputational concern. The corridor fell quiet again, but the stillness now carried weight rather than uncertainty, and as Central Security confirmed that senior administration had been notified, the guard understood that the matter had moved beyond maintenance and into the realm of authority.
The nursery wing was temporarily sealed within 30 minutes, not with alarm but with procedure. Access points were restricted, corridor cameras rerouted to a monitored channel, and all non-essential movement quietly diverted to alternate routes. The Royal Guard remained stationed outside the nursery door while the child continued to sleep inside, unaware of the administrative current forming beyond the walls. The facility supervisor stood several paces away, posture controlled, hands folded loosely before him as though awaiting routine clearance rather than inquiry. A senior security officer arrived shortly after, coat collar still carrying the chill of the exterior courtyard, expression composed but attentive. The guard delivered his report without embellishment, presenting timestamps, camera stills, and the photographed relay panel in a concise sequence. He described the unsecured service door, the scent inconsistent with nursery maintenance, and the partially disengaged connector. He did not speculate. He confined himself to observation. The senior officer listened, occasionally glancing toward the supervisor, who maintained that the manual override had been precautionary and harmless. When asked again about written authorization, the supervisor repeated that a senior household aide had instructed discretion to avoid administrative clutter, a phrase that settled poorly in the corridor's disciplined atmosphere. The guard watched the exchange from a slight remove, aware that hierarchy was shifting around him. Questioning facilities management required crossing informal boundaries that palace staff respected even without written codification. Yet the absence of documentation in a wing occupied by a royal child was not a minor omission. The senior officer requested the name of the aide who allegedly issued the verbal order. The supervisor hesitated only briefly before providing it. The name carried weight within the household, associated with scheduling and internal coordination close to the royal family. The senior officer instructed central administration to verify the claim. While waiting, the guard reviewed the access log once more and noticed that the manual override had been initiated using a facility's master credential rather than a temporary maintenance code. Such credentials allowed broader access and were rarely employed without written justification. He noted this detail quietly and transmitted it to the senior officer's device. The supervisor observed the gesture and shifted his stance, tightening the line of his shoulders. He stated that excessive scrutiny risked undermining trust between departments.
The guard did not respond. He focused instead on the steady hum of the ventilation and the soft glow still visible beneath the nursery door, reminding himself of the reason the inquiry existed at all. A message arrived from administration. The senior aide denied issuing any instruction for sensor calibration that evening and confirmed no knowledge of maintenance in the nursery wing. The corridor grew markedly still as the information settled. The supervisor's composure faltered by degrees, not collapsing but thinning. He adjusted his cuffs, glancing toward the lift as though calculating distance. The senior security officer requested that the supervisor surrender his access badge pending clarification. The request was delivered politely, without accusation. The supervisor complied, though his movements carried a restrained rigidity. The guard felt the atmosphere shift from routine discrepancy to formal investigation, and with that shift came an unspoken implication. Someone with legitimate authority had acted outside procedure, and the explanation no longer aligned with observable fact. The supervisor was escorted to a private administrative office for formal questioning, and the Royal Guard was instructed to submit a full written account before the end of his shift. He returned briefly inside the nursery to confirm the child's condition once more, noting the unchanged rhythm of sleep and the gentle rise and fall of blankets in the dim light. He adjusted the lamp to its standard night setting, restoring the room to its documented configuration, and secured the secondary service door with an auxiliary seal that required dual authorization to reopen. Outside, the corridor lights returned to their normal intensity, though the sense of containment remained. He proceeded to the security operations room, where footage from the past 6 hours was replayed across a bank of monitors. Alongside a technical analyst, he examined the precise moment of distortion again, this time cross-referencing it with internal system logs. The relay interference had not been random, it had been introduced manually, reducing signal strength just enough to create a brief blind interval without triggering automatic alerts. Such calibration required familiarity with the system's tolerances. It was neither accidental nor exploratory. While they worked, word circulated that the facility supervisor had revised his statement, now claiming that he had intended to conduct an unscheduled stress test of security response times to evaluate security readiness, asserting that no actual threat existed and that the nursery had been chosen due to its high monitoring priority. The explanation introduced a different problem. Unsanctioned testing in an occupied royal nursery constituted a breach of both operational and ethical standards. The guard considered this claim carefully. A stress test implied deliberate manipulation of security infrastructure near a vulnerable child without informing protective staff. Even if no intrusion had been planned, the act itself created a window of uncertainty. He documented the revised statement without commentary, attaching his earlier observations. The senior security officer informed him that the matter would be escalated beyond internal review, given the involvement of a royal minor and the misuse of master credentials. As the night advanced toward early morning, fatigue edged at the guard's concentration, but he resisted it, aware that precision in his report would determine how the situation was interpreted at higher levels. Before concluding his shift, he returned once more to the nursery corridor, now quiet and restored, and stood for a moment outside the sealed door. The palace around him appeared unchanged, stone walls steady, tapestries undisturbed, staff moving discreetly along distant hallways. Yet he understood that a subtle fracture had formed within its internal trust. He had acted according to instinct when procedure advised delay, and that decision uncovered a deliberate interference framed as maintenance. Whether the motive was misguided initiative or something less benign would be determined later. For now, the record bears his name, attached to a deviation from protocol and to the exposure of authority acting outside oversight. He straightened his posture, aware that the next stage would not unfold in corridors, but in offices where reputation, hierarchy, and accountability carried equal weight, and he prepared himself for the consequences that scrutiny might bring.
By early morning the palace had resumed its measured rhythm, though beneath the visible order a quiet administrative gravity had formed. The royal guard reported to the central briefing chamber at 8 o'clock, uniform immaculate, expression neutral, aware that the night's events had travelled upward through layers of authority more swiftly than most internal matters. A sealed folder bearing the palace crest rested at the head of the conference table, and senior security officials occupied their places with restrained formality. The guard remained standing until instructed otherwise, then delivered a final verbal clarification of his written report, limiting himself to confirmed observations: camera distortion at 2211, unsecured service door, partially disengaged relay connector, absence of authorized documentation, conflicting statements from facilities management. He did not refer to instinct or suspicion, he referred only to sequence. The room listened in disciplined silence. Shortly thereafter, confirmation arrived that the matter had been formally presented to King Charles during the morning administrative review, not as a dramatic breach, but as a procedural irregularity involving the nursery wing. The response was neither public nor theatrical. It was direct. A full security review of all after-hours overrides and master credential usage, effective immediately. The order carried administrative weight without visible emotion. For the guard, the significance lay not in royal attention itself, but in what it implied, that the concern had been deemed legitimate at the highest level. The facilities supervisor, now temporarily relieved of system access, maintained that his actions had been an internal stress assessment intended to identify weaknesses, yet under questioning he was unable to produce any directive authorizing such evaluation. Logs revealed that the master credential he used had been active beyond its designated window on 2 prior evenings, though without corresponding interference events. The pattern suggested preparation rather than spontaneity. The guard was assigned to assist the review team in reconstructing the timeline, walking investigators through the corridor, the service passage, and the relay panel. As they moved, he noted small details he had not emphasized before: the precise angle of the misaligned panel, the chemical scent lingering faintly in the ventilation shaft, the absence of tool residue on the exterior latch, indicating deliberate care. Each observation tightened the narrative into something structured. Mid-afternoon, the review committee requested clarification on his decision to override protocol and enter the nursery without waiting for a second officer. The question was posed without accusation, yet its implications were clear. He answered that the presence of unexplained illumination combined with signal distortion created sufficient grounds under Section 9 authority for immediate welfare verification. He stated that the child's safety was the determining factor. The explanation was accepted and recorded. Still, he understood that deviation from protocol, even when validated, rarely passed without examination. As daylight shifted across the courtyard outside the briefing room windows, he sensed the institution recalibrating around the incident, balancing discipline with responsiveness. The review extended beyond facilities into broader systemic analysis: who authorized master credentials, how overrides were logged, why intermittent interference failed to trigger automated alerts. The palace functioned not on spectacle,
but on controlled systems, and those systems had been tested without consent. By evening, preliminary findings suggested that the facility's supervisor's claimed stress test had been conducted independently, motivated by a belief that response times required evaluation before an upcoming public event. Yet selecting the nursery wing, occupied by a minor royal, had crossed an unspoken boundary. The guard absorbed this conclusion without visible reaction, aware that motive, however rationalized, did not diminish risk. The review was far from complete, and he remained on standby, prepared for further questioning. Outside, the palace grounds appeared tranquil, but within administrative offices, accountability had begun to take formal shape. The following day, King Charles requested a concise summary of the review's interim findings, delivered through established channels rather than direct confrontation. The emphasis, according to those present, was on structural correction rather than personal reprimand. Orders were issued to tighten master credential protocols, require dual confirmation for all sensor calibrations near residential royal quarters, and implement automated alerts for even minor signal degradation in protected wings. The language of the directive was measured, devoid of dramatization, yet unmistakably corrective. The facility's supervisor, after extended inquiry, conceded that he had believed a discrete test would demonstrate initiative and expose complacency, though he acknowledged failing to anticipate the ethical dimension of manipulating security near a sleeping child. Disciplinary action was determined internally, administrative rather than criminal, but his authority within the palace infrastructure was permanently reduced. The royal guard observed these developments from a professional distance. He was neither vindicated publicly nor criticized. His name appeared in documentation as the initiating observer whose report triggered review. In a final debrief, a senior officer informed him that his discretionary entry had been deemed appropriate under the circumstances, though the importance of documentation and restraint was reiterated. He accepted the statement with a nod, understanding the balance being preserved, instinct validated, but discipline reinforced. That evening he returned to duty outside the nursery wing, posture unchanged from previous nights, yet the environment subtly different. New indicator lights had been installed near the access panel, and the relay housing in the service passage bore a tamper-evident seal. The corridor lighting seemed slightly brighter, though perhaps that was perception rather than fact. He listened once more to the steady silence beyond the nursery door, aware that protection often consisted not of visible heroism, but of quiet vigilance. The child inside continued a routine of sleep and waking without knowledge of the administrative turbulence that had briefly encircled the room. As the palace settled into its nocturnal calm, the guard reflected not on recognition, but on alignment. Protocol refined by experience, authority reminded of its boundaries, and instinct neither indulged nor suppressed, but integrated into formal structure. The institution had corrected itself without spectacle. A vulnerability had been revealed before it could be exploited. And in the corridor's measured stillness, beneath regulated light and controlled air, the guard resumed his silent watch, conscious that the integrity of protection depended as much on questioning power as on defending it.